With spring practice just a few weeks away, there are a handful of things that I am hoping to hear out of Eugene in the first practices of 2025. We are making history on this edition of TSOW, the very first guest in the history of the program. Travis Rooke-Ley from the Ducks Rising NIL group will be talking about, you guessed it, NIL, Ducks Rising, and we're going to throw in some Ducks ball talk as well at the end. This is That Show Out West. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. Maybe in some parts of Oregon, certainly some parts here in the Central Time Zone, we are starting to see signs of spring. The snow is starting to melt, which means the off-season is starting to melt away a little bit. And pretty soon the flowers are going to be blooming, and thus the bloom of another season of Oregon Ducks football. Hope springs eternal. March springs eternal. Spring practice is just a few weeks away. I could not be more excited for really the start of this 2025 group all across the country. This is really the start when you get all your players on a practice field, when you start to find out which players have maybe made the progression since the end of last season to now here in spring practice, where you get these early enrollees are on campus. You get these transfers are on campus, right? You're coming off of a recruiting dead period. December and February signing days are in the books. Transfer portal periods are well closed. Now it's time to get on the field. And now it's time to really start to find out what developments have been made throughout parts of this football team. It's kind of difficult for position battles to be completely won, of course, in the spring period, but a lot of times spring practice can lay the foundation for one player or another to really set themselves up for a starting role when fall camp certainly comes around. Now, of course, we're going to see next to nothing. We're going to see some maybe highlight clips on Twitter and some of the social media feeds from this great Oregon creative staff. And of course, we'll see some things certainly in the spring game in late April as well, but I've got a handful of things that I'm hoping to hear and some rumblings that I'm hoping to hear out of spring practice for this Ducks football team. Let's start first on the defensive side of the football. I am hoping to hear that Bear Alexander is clawing his way to the top of the depth chart. Now, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. There's a lot of depth in this defensive line room. There are good players in this defensive line room. I am by no means saying, hey, Oregon needs Bear Alexander to be a top level, top of his ceiling type of player to be a really good defensive line this next season. I think there's good enough players in this room, talented enough players in this room that if Bear Alexander does not reach his ceiling, and if Bear Alexander is a depth piece and maybe one of these other guys steps up into a bigger role, that's going to be fine. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that if we get the high ceiling, if we get a locked in and dialed in Bear Alexander, we know it. He's got all of the talent in the world. If we see Bear Alexander playing at that high level, and this coaching staff, Tony Tubeyote, Tash Lapoy, going all the way up to Dan Lanning, if they have Bear Alexander dialed in and starting to reach that potential that everybody has talked about when he played at Georgia, when he transferred to USC, if he's dialed in at Oregon, I think the depth of this defensive line goes from good to massive. Because if Bear steps in, and when you kind of look at some of these newer pieces, whether it's freshmen that were there last year, I guess maybe they're not new pieces because they were on this team last year, but newer pieces that are, I think, expected to step up into bigger roles would maybe be a little bit of a better way to word it. Newer guys in terms of playing impact roles. I think when it comes to Bear is probably the guy that's most experienced out of all of these guys, and maybe the guy this season that can have the highest ceiling. I really like Aiden Breland. I really like Terrence Green. I think those are really good football players. And I think when their Duck careers are done, they are going to be great Oregon Duck football players. But I think of the 2025, I think of the right here and the right now. Like, let me just try to paint a picture for you as it pertains to this with Bear Alexander. A defensive line with Mateo Uiagalelei, with Amari Washington. You guys have heard me say it, and I think you've probably heard others say it as well, how good he can be and how much of a big step he can make forward on the defensive line. He was in that rotation last year. And then you have Bear Alexander. Once again, we're saying hypothetically, if he's playing at that high level of football. Like, that's what's established. We're establishing this in this hypothetical world right now, that those are three guys that are playing high-level defensive line football. And then you look at the depth. If you've got a rotation of Terrence Green, of Tioni Gray, of Aiden Breland, and some of these other guys on the defensive line, you've got a great rotation of players up front on that defensive line group, which is going to make everybody just that much more fresh. I think a high-level Bear Alexander maybe creates a little bit of a higher-level Oregon Ducks defensive line, certainly as well. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see where Bear Alexander is in the spring. I think starting off strong in spring practice is going to go a long way to Bear Alexander being an impact player on this Ducks defensive line. But that's certainly something that I've got my ears perked up a little bit to see, or to hear, I should say, exactly where he is and exactly where some of these other guys are on the defensive line as well. Let's move to the offensive side of the football. You know, the spring game is really the only time where we see long periods of play. A lot of times it's social media clips. A lot of times it's short segments. A lot of times it's flashes. And I am hoping that Decorian Moore flashes immediately in spring practice in Eugene, Oregon. I think starting off with a lot of momentum, if he is clearly coming in, setting the tone, it says, I'm here to play, and I'm here to play now. I think you get a lot of momentum going in spring practice. You get a lot of buzz certainly being generated of what he can really be this next season. And I think you gain that confidence. Not only does Decorian gain that confidence, but the coaching staff also gains that confidence certainly as well. And it creates chemistry for the fall. I tweeted out a clip of history, the first known public in the wild connection between Dante Moore and Decorian Moore. If Decorian comes into this thing right away, he's an early enrollee. If he comes into spring practice and he is clearly has his nose deep into the playbook, and he is clearly ahead of maybe where other freshmen have been historically, not only mentally and where he has to be in certain concepts, but also where he is athletically, I think that gets Oregon onto a track that they certainly want to be on for the 2025 season. We saw the social media clips last season of Jeremiah Smith, and he's out there in spring practice. He's making one-handed catches. He's doing crazy stuff in the spring. And I think we all kind of knew with a guy of that frame and a guy of that talent, and we saw some of that in spring practice, we kind of knew maybe what was going to happen. Those are the kind of flashes. That's the kind of excitement that I want to try to generate. And that's what I want to hear as it pertains to DeCorian Moore coming out of spring practice right now. I want DeCorian to come into this thing and create a clear hierarchy at the wide receiver position. This is not meant as a slight to Jeremiah McClellan, to Kyler Casper, to Jurion Dickey, to Justice Lowe, to Gary Bryant, to those guys that I've talked about in the battle with the number 3 wide receiver position. But I want to see DeCorian Moore clearly identify himself. I want to hear that he is above some of those players. That's what I want to hear. I want to hear a hierarchy where only Evan Stewart is maybe above him in that hierarchy. That's what I want to see. I think that's the best version of Oregon that we're going to see in 2025. If Evan Stewart is your number 1 guy, if DeCorian Moore capitalizes in that number 2 role, whether he's out wide, whether he's in the slot, no matter where he is lined up in the formation, like if you have a spring period where maybe DeCorian isn't maybe molding into at this high level of college play, and then maybe you're seeing some things with Jeremiah and Kyler and all those guys. Like, once again, all due respect to those guys, I think those guys are going to play big parts in this Ducks offense this year. I just think the talent of DeCorian Moore, you want to see that really evolve through spring. You want to hear that evolve as that number 2 guy. And then you want to fill in the gaps with the rotation, I think, as the number 3 receivers that I've talked about. I think that's the perfect combination. And I think that's what we want to see out of DeCorian Moore. That's what we want to, I keep on saying C, but you know kind of where I'm trending with this, and you know kind of the direction that I'm going with this. We want to hear that DeCorian Moore is coming onto campus. He's saying, me and E-Stu, we're going to be a great 1-2 combination, and then a rotation is being solidified, certainly with that wide receiver 3 battle that I talked about behind them as well. Let's head back to the defensive side of the football. In spring practice, there are battles. This is really the genesis of a lot of position battles within a football team. And there may be no position group with more battles, with more names, with more stars than the secondary. The ultimate line change. 5 guys out and 5 guys in. There is going to be hella competition right here. And I think one thing that I want to hear coming out in spring practice and coming out of spring practice as it pertains to the secondary, I want to see these battles, and I want to make sure that they're turning into wars as we go to the summer workouts, as we go to fall camp, because I think it could signal that there is a lot of depth in this football team at the secondary position, and that the coaching staff did a great job identifying talent that can fit in with the scheme of within this Oregon defense, certainly with Tosh Lapoy as well. Like, you guys know the names, the Jaleel Florence, and no really any given position. These are just names that are coming off the top of my head. Jaleel Florence, Kingston Lopa, Peyton Woodyard, those 2 guys are safeties. Ife Obadegwu, right? A lot of smoke coming out about him, that he could be an impact corner certainly this season as well. Get the true freshmen in there. I want to hear that these true freshmen are in the battle. Naeem Offord and Trey McNutt and Dorian Brew and Brandon Finney. I want to hear that these guys are hitting the ground running, that this staff has done a great job bringing in talent, and talent that's not only has tremendous skill, but is also extremely competitive. I think that this is going to be a really competitive spring at this particular position, and I want to see it turn into wars as we really get closer to the football season, even beyond the spring as well. I think depth is and I think with the talent they've recruited over the last couple of years, This is their opportunity, right? You had the Tysheem Johnsons, the Kobe Savages, the Nico Reeds, the Jabbar Muhammads, right? You maybe had some of these guys that short-term transferred in for a short period of time. Now it's time for these guys to really step up into a bigger role. Who's going to step up? My hope is that a lot of these players really show in spring practice. My hope is that we hear that these players, a lot of them are very competitive, and these battles are going to go into the fall a little bit, and that the secondary is going to be deep at a lot of positions. Last thing, and this is an overall team mentality. This is an overall team mindset type of topic that I really want to finish off with as well. I want to hear, now I know it's spring practice, there's some walkthroughs, there's some learnings, but in spring practice, they do some hitting. In spring practice, they do some of these more high-intensity practices. They do some of these scrimmages, and of course, you eventually get to the spring game as well. But I want to hear coming out of spring practice that this is a mega motivated football team. I want to hear that some of these scrimmages really brought the fire. I want to hear that Dan Lanning has this team from the word go. I don't care if it's March. I don't care how early it is in the season. I want to hear that this team knows and has felt the pain of the past two seasons, knows how good of football teams that they were the past two seasons, and they have harnessed that pain, and they are starting off with a lot of passion in their practices, in these position battles, in these scrimmages. And I want to hear that some of these seniors are also very vocal leaders as well. Guys like Bryce Betcher on defense and Noah Whittington, guys on offense that are kind of in that super senior mold, that are expected to be leaders, guys who have been through the battles and the wars within Dan Lanning's tenure as head coach of this program. I want to hear that this football team has an edge from day number one. And if you have that edge as a football team early, that edge is also going to continue to grow. I mentioned the seniors, these guys that have been around for a few years, I think being vocal leaders. I think, we're all focused on Dante Moore's arm ability and his arm talent and everything like that. And we saw that picture at spring practice where everybody, all eyes on QB1, all eyes on Dante Moore. I want to hear that Dante Moore is also taking on that vocal leadership, that vocal leader in the locker room that everybody is looking to. It starts early, folks. It starts in spring practice. And I cannot wait to hear some of the rumblings that is going to be coming from Eugene, Oregon this spring. We teased it at the beginning of the show. Heck, we even teased it last week, but we're making that show out west history right about now. The wait is over. It is the very first guest in TSOW history, and we are kicking things off with a bang. I am now pleased to be joined by Travis Rooke-Ley, the director of content of the Ducks Rising NIL group. There is a lot of great things to talk about with what is happening over at Ducks Rising. And of course, we're going to get into some Oregon Ducks ball talk a little bit later on in this discussion as well. Now, when I kind of look at Ducks Rising, and I know what you guys are certainly doing over there, you've got a unique approach, certainly, to NIL in the current NIL space right now. And it's all about the fans. Like, there's a lot of sites out there, the 24/7 affiliates, the Rivals affiliates, the On3's affiliates. You guys kind of take a similar media type of approach, but subscribers that are, paying to see your content are also helping the football team retain players, continue to build a championship roster. How do you think you guys are being unique and different in the NIL space right now?
For sure. And just, thanks from all of us for having us on, and just appreciate the platform. I think the nice thing about getting in on this NIL world early is we have the optionality and flexibility to kind of combine two worlds like you talked about. So, a rabid fan base like Oregon that fans just want to consume content and read about recruits 4 years down the line and know about the depth chart 8 months out. It's the perfect avenue for us to, like you said, combine a intel, media, team notes, connection to coaches, connection to players kind of environment, while also, like you said, giving fans the ability to contribute directly towards, as we call it, like the acquisition and retention of talent. So, rather than having your dollars go out multimedia corporations, places like that, Ducks Rising is a place to get the best news, the latest news directly from coaches, staff, players, while also 97% of our dollars go back to the players themselves. So the statistic we like to cite is Coach Lanning is the only coach in the last 4 years that has not lost a starter to the portal, and you can help play a role in that. So I think it's a pretty unique opportunity for Duck fans.
Yeah, fans have now maybe more of a role than they ever had over these last couple of years to really influence the direction of the team. And when a lot of people talk about NIL, they talk about retainment, kind of what you were just talking about right there. Now, you guys got a lot of great new stuff kind of coming on down the pike. Right now, we're excited for spring football maybe starting up here in just a few weeks. There's a lot of excitement building for the 2025 Oregon Ducks on the field, and there's a lot of excitement building for you guys over there at Ducks Rising. You just launched a redesigned website on Saturday that certainly looks great, and a lot of new options and new features for subscribers over there, exclusive interviews. Kind of touch on some of the new exciting things that you have for your members over at Ducks Rising.
Yeah, I mean, never an off season for Duck fans for sure, but we did want to capitalize a little bit on the dead time per se before spring fires up. So yeah, Saturday, relaunched a whole new site. Check us out, ducksrising.com. New website, which we really think is kind of clean and new and innovative and speaks to that sense of Oregon that, we've always been known nationally for. And then within that, we've been able to roll out this new tier system that we feel like just offers fans really unique insider perspective. So we have a first tier that kind of gives you access to our community, our chat, kind of like more of a message board feel. But then at that second tier, we're being able to offer fans access to Q&As with players, staff. One thing we did previously was that we plan to offer again was a live Q&A with Marshall Maucho, who's the Oregon CEO and chief of staff. And just for fans to be able to have a look kind of on the inside to what goes into the day-to-day of this operation, as you're seeing coaches across the country getting hired as college GMs nowadays, the personnel staffs and the football staffs associated with these schools is just crazy now. And so I think it's been cool for Duck fans to have kind of a unique look into that. And as far as we're concerned, we're the only ones out there that can show that right now. And what's nice is the staff itself has a reason to kind of let us in the door, because as we talked about earlier, we're supporting them and in turn they're supporting us.
Boy, no better place to find inside access and support your team at the same time. That's a 2-for-1 deal if I ever saw one, certainly over there. So you guys kind of mentioned your Q&As and your exclusive interviews that you've had over at the site. Who have been some of your favorite Duck personnel, whether it's been coaches, whether it's been players, whether it's been some of this administration over there? Who have been some of your favorite guys to talk to in some of these exclusive interviews?
Yeah, I mean, definitely twofold. I think that in season, we've got a players lounge channel that some of the players pop in and out of. So last year we had a couple of our athletes, Justice Lowe, Connor Soleil, Terrence Ferguson, popped into our players lounge channel before the Penn State game and just talked through game prep and what they were fired up for going into that game. So that's just one of those peaks that's super cool to get a glimpse into what goes into the day-to-day. They talked about, the UW helmet getting smashed at halftime of that game and how that came about. So it's just those little tidbits that are fun. And then I think at the same time, I mentioned it earlier, talking to the player personnel guys and learning about what goes into scouting, portal, all these kind of words we hear talked about a lot, but how does the sausage actually get made on a day-to-day, and all that goes into that was a super cool look for us.
Now, being in the NIL space, I'm sure you've got an eye on things happening this summer. The House versus NCAA settlement is expected to maybe change the structure of player compensation. They've talked about rev sharing and all of that, and what NIL may or may not look like. I think down the road is a question that a lot of people have as we approach the summer, as we approach the new 2025 season. How do you envision NIL looking for Ducks Rising in the future, considering some of the changes that might happen for the summer and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, an ever-changing world. I feel like direction is coming out every day that
Right.
sometimes is contradictory with each other and state law and all that stuff. What I do know is that no matter what happens with House, us being able to, as a collective, being able to supplement and be there for athletes in the program in general is not going to go away. I think you've heard a lot of people in the national media, and I tend to agree with this, say that House settlement is going to kind of um, spread things across and make things a little more equal across athletic department to department. But I think that's where a school like Oregon, with a highly organized, dialed collective, can supplement and continue to kind of give us an edge in that space. And you've seen, when you give Dan Lanning and Marshall Mountchow and the rest of them any bit of an edge, they're going to take advantage. You can see the rosters the last couple of years certainly speak to that.
And they have certainly taken advantage of it with some great rosters, as you mentioned. All right, let's get into some football talk about said roster, certainly here right now. We're just coming off of this NIL talk and what you guys are doing over there at Ducks Rising in the first part. And this is kind of the bridge that I want to create here to now that we're talking about the upcoming spring. We're coming about the upcoming season. A lot of narrative goes around about money and Oregon, certainly right now. But a lot of time there's transfers. A lot of times there's recruits where Oregon isn't the highest money offer on the table. Why do you think Eugene, Oregon has been such an attractive destination for some of these, they've had top 5 recruiting classes and then some of these great transfer classes as well?
For sure. I mean, the irony of the USCs and Washingtons of the world calling old Eugene, Oregon, the rich one, is always, the irony is never lost on me. But yeah, I mean, I think that for someone who's been lucky enough like me to spend a little bit of time around the HDC and that operation, the attention to detail within the staff of like building that culture and environment is the first thing you feel day one. The way that Dan from the top down, like, engages with staff, brings people in, cultivates that like family environment, I think is the biggest key by far. I think you see that with anytime you're a school, in Eugene, you need kids. You can't recruit just Oregon. You can't recruit just the West Coast, even so nowadays. And so if kids are going to send, or, families are going to send their kids 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 miles away, they need to feel comfortable in that staff that they're going to be taken care of. And I think that the relationships and just like the trust factor that Lanning all the way down to his staff, it's a team and community effort. You hear these recruits, like a lot of times they'll be recruited by just a single guy at another school. At Oregon, it's 4, 5, 6 coaches who are building relationships. And I think that's not only led to like an amazing amount of staff retention here over the last 3 years, because coaches like being here and working for them, but player wise as well.
I like what you said there with relationships. I'm not sure I'm or you are breaking any news by saying Dan Lanning is one of the best in terms of developing relationships. You've mentioned with families, with recruits, with the number of coaches that are going out on these visits. And I think that's certainly a big reason why recruits and transfers are certainly flocking in to Eugene, Oregon right now. You kind of brought up maybe some of the narratives for the rivals down in LA and, of course, the rivals up north in Seattle right now. Let's talk maybe about, there's a little bit of momentum, some might say, for USC. We know the flip that just took place with Jonas Williams, the 4-star quarterback, but I think you and I know the reason why that took place. But obviously there's a gap between Oregon and the rest of the West Coast, maybe USC. They think they're maybe closing that gap a little bit. In your eyes, just how big of a gap do you feel there is between the Ducks and those 3 other West Coast Big Ten schools?
I mean, I think it's naive of any Oregon fan to think that USC was never going to be back in some respect.
Right.
And we welcome those battles as Oregon fans. I don't think I ever expected a day where we were going to be able to cherry pick Los Angeles like we have the last, 5 years, it seemed like. So I do think with USC's like personnel hires over the offseason and some of their defensive hires last year, I don't, I'm not above saying that I think that they're making some progress. But when find me the recruit that Dan's going to go up against Lincoln for, that Dan's going to lose out on. And to me, there's not going to be many. So as long as Dan's driving the train when it comes to USC, I feel pretty confident there in that head coaching mismatch. As far as Washington goes, I don't.
You know.
They're just not building at the level, especially on the offensive and defensive line that we are right now.
Yep.
And until they do, I'm just not inclined to be that worried about them. I mean, the last two classes, their best commits, we've been able to flip anytime we wanted to. So until they start recruiting at the level that Coach Pete had them at, I think things should be settled.
You know, you look at the rest of those teams, those three teams that we mentioned. Washington was 6-6, UCLA 5-7, and USC 6-6, and we all know the Ducks 12-0 certainly last season. You know, when I look to the offense for this season in 2025, I want to take a look back maybe first at the 2024 offense as compared to that 2023. We know the numbers that certainly Bo Nix and company put up in 2023. A little bit of a dip down in 2024. I think we knew what we were getting at the quarterback position with Dylan Gabriel, but I think there's a lot of people, myself included, very excited about the arm talent, very excited about the just overall talent that is Dante Moore, and I think he's a big key to that puzzle to be able to get Oregon to maybe put up the production like they did in 2023 over there with Bo Nix. Do you see the offense maybe returning more to its 2023 form with Dante at the controls here next season?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we're looking just purely in terms of parallels, I think you'll probably see a little more to Bo than you would have with Dylan. I think that, but even the last 2 years, I mean, with Nix and Gabriel were both at times, I think, a little gun shy to push the ball down the field. I think that they also, given their experience, were more than happy to just like take a 5-yard check down, move the chains every time, and I think that that's smart quarterbacking in a lot of senses. So I know Duck fans love to hate on Will Stein as much as they can, on the message boards because he throws too many wide receiver screens. I mean, by every offensive metric, we've been in the top 5 the last 2 years. I assume we'll be close to that again. But like you said, just the difference. I mean, Dante Moore's arm talent is something that the people I trust are not sure it's ever really been seen at Oregon in terms of just straight arm ability. So I think you'll see I mean, it's naive to not expect a little more variability. I mean, the way that Nix and Gabriel, took care of the ball, played into that. But I think in terms of like explosiveness with Evan Stewart, with DeCorian Moore, some of these guys coming in, I think that's the big change you'll see is just a little more of a push down the field.
And that's what I'm really excited about. We know the short passing game. We know getting rid of the football quickly has been a big MO of Will Stein and this offense. And hey, it certainly worked out really well, as you mentioned, these past 2 years. But man, you can't help but get excited about taking what you have, and you got a pretty good package offer right now, and then adding something on top of it with the talent, especially with that speed on the outside with Evan and DeCorian that you talked about as well. Flipping over to the defensive side of the football right now, I called the line change in the secondary. 5 guys out and 5 new guys are going to come in. Do you believe that this Ducks secondary will be better? You get someone like Dylan Thieneman, a 2-time All-Big Ten performer coming over from Purdue. A lot of young talent, a lot of stars behind these names. I think there's a lot to be excited about, but what's kind of your view of the secondary? They've been taking incremental steps maybe up the ladder. Where do you see them kind of taking steps up maybe this year?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and specifically with Thieneman, we've had multiple conversations with staff who have said they think he might be the best player on the roster right now. Yeah. I think he is an absolute stud and is going to probably end up just being a 1-year guy because of it. Right. Beyond that, I think the big difference you'll see is like higher upside, and by the end of the year, probably a better group than we've seen the last 2 years. But I think there might be a little growing pains with it that comes with the inexperience. I think that the length, range, speed is what you're getting out of this group. And that's where we've lacked in our biggest moments the last couple of years. I think we've had really disciplined, veteran, high floor defenders in the second level the last couple of years. But as you saw against Washington 2023 championship game, and Ohio State this year, it came back to bite us a little bit. So I think the big difference this year is like we've got guys like 6'2", 6'3", big safeties that can run. I'm super excited about Kingston Lopa at safety. He'd be my projection today to start alongside Thieneman. And then at corner, we just got like a litany of 6 foot to 6'2", 4, 5-star guys. And specifically, I think Ife Odubegwu is going to be one that's going to be heard from a lot. I would bet he starts if I had to guess right now.
Yeah, they bring in Theron Johnson, who comes in from Northwestern. He was an all Big Ten performer as well. And a lot of people, I've been hearing that smoke about Iffy as well. So that's certainly, and there's a lot of other names. We know Jaleel Florence is out there. There's just, as you mentioned, the list goes on and on and on, certainly at corner. I'm really excited about those spring battles in the secondary. Peyton Woodyard is another name to maybe keep an eye on at safety. So there's going to be a lot of these battles. Competition certainly makes everybody kind of step up to that next level as well. Defensive line. There's been some folks online that say, hey, even though you're losing 3 starters on this group, maybe it's the deepest group. Maybe it's one of the better groups in terms of position rooms on this team. Losing 3 starters, you might think, well, there might be a little bit of regression there, but Mateo, of course, is coming back. He was one of the top sack guys in the Big Ten last year. Amari Washington, he was certainly in that rotation after Jamari Caldwell and after Derek Harmon, so he's certainly going to be able to step up, I think, and get to that next level. But some people think that this could be a really big room. For me, it seems to hinge maybe on Bear Alexander and what he can do. What are kind of your thoughts on this defensive line room when you combine it with the edge rushers? Because I think there could be a lot of things to be excited about if guys can certainly live up to some of that potential.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super natural for people who aren't plugged into the Oregon scene to see, Caldwell, Birch, Harmon show out at the combine this week and say, oh, Oregon's, there's going to be a big dip. I think that's, a narrative, albeit a lazy one, if you really look into it, as you mentioned. I think that anytime you bring back a couple bookends in Tuioti and Mateo, you're set at edge, and we've got a bunch of young puppies there who have been, waiting in the wings to come play behind them. Amari Washington, I mean, I think even as of last year, he probably starts for 2/3 of Big Ten teams, 3/4 of Big Ten teams, probably everyone except us, Ohio State and Michigan. I think he's as disruptive of a nose tackle as we've had in a while. I mean, the amount of times he was in the backfield last year was crazy. And then, as you say, I mean, the nice thing about Bear is you bring Bear in all the talent in the world, but the pressure's on him, not us. I mean, Tioni Gray, Aiden Breland, Jericho Johnson. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of these guys we've had waiting in the wings, ready to play. Terrence Green, another one. So if Bear beats him out, awesome. That means Bear is really freaking good and is finally playing to his potential. If he's not, these guys are going to pop. So, yeah, I mean, you're never going to lose a first-round draft pick and a couple other NFL guys and immediately say you're going to upgrade. But I think from all conversations with the staff, they feel good about where we are.
Bear Alexander, you look up low risk, high reward in the dictionary, and I think that's the type of situation that you get with Bear because, like you mentioned, if it doesn't work, I think he's got 2 years of eligibility left. If it doesn't work out, some of these younger guys where, Tony Tuioti, the defensive line coach, of course, and the staff, they did a really good job recruiting over these last couple of years, then those are guys that can certainly step up into those types of situations as well. All right. You've been a season ticket holder for a long time up there, graduate of South Eugene High School in Eugene, local kid, certainly. What game at Autzen Stadium on the schedule this year has you most excited? The Beavs coming to town in late September. Of course, they're going to go on the road to Penn State, but Indiana's coming to Autzen. You got USC at the end of the year. Which one of these games really gets you excited to be able to shout about, certainly, this season?
I mean, it's got to be USC for us. I mean, for those of us, you mentioned South Eugene, they grew up right at that age. I mean, my formative high school, becoming a huge fan years were just getting trampled by USC at Autzen. So I specifically, one of my earliest memories was that 2005 game where we went up 10-0 on them and then were completely blown out of the water. So for us that just grew up hating USC and always wanting that level of talent, playing for titles and different things, and just that hatred was built early. So to have the tables flipped a little bit like we talked about earlier, and anytime they come into our house, no matter the year either of us are having, there's a lot of vitriol in that stadium for sure.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun one. Towards the end of the season, how will USC be? You got to think Oregon might be in a position to possibly clinch a playoff spot at that time. So that's certainly going to be a lot of fun. If you haven't yet, consider going over there and subscribing and being a part of the community that is Ducks Rising. Travis does a great job at all of the content that they put together, from exclusive interviews to some of these other benefits from being a member of Ducks Rising. Travis, great to talk to you today. And hey, this August, when I'm coming to Oregon, we might have to meet up and sit down and have a beer or something, or meet on top of a mountain or something. But once again, appreciate you for coming on here today.
Not a problem. Appreciate you having us. And yep, fans, just check us out. Give us a chance. You won't regret it.
Big thanks to Travis from Ducks Rising for making TSOW history today. We continue to make TSOW history with each and every single show as the show continues to grow to more and more Duck fans just like yourself. So until next time, I'm Ted LaRue. This has been That Show Out West.